our meeting with a debate session where we have invited 4 panelists from diverse profiles and backgrounds to express their views. They were asked not to exceed 10 minutes, if possible a bit less, in order to allow enough time for general discussion afterwards. Our first debate speaker is Professor Tine de Laat, who is involved in student support and guidance at the Faculty of Engineering at KU Leuven. Professor de Laat, it's up to you.
I'm trying to refine the screen to turn on my camera. Start video. Yes. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. I just want to raise 2 thoughts in my discussion. So what about assessment of student achievement in higher education? 2 thoughts. We already have been hearing about learning analytics. I just came here with the definition of my former colleague Eric Duval, who sadly passed away some years ago. We already have been talking about how assessment could also be focused on assessment for learning, and how learning analytics and learning dashboards could then offer an opportunity for feedback at scale. What we must always remember, particularly when we're going towards learning analytics, is that feedback must be actionable. And I just give you here a typical conclusion we could get from data. Like we could see from higher education data that male students are less likely to be successful in higher education. So maybe we could build a learning analytics dashboard that would show to someone like warning. Male students are less likely to be successful and you are male. But what's the action that someone can take based on such a statement? Changing gender is very unlikely to increase the chances to be successful. We could, of course, focus on a less confronting example maybe and just saying like, okay, warning, your online activity is lagging behind. So then the action would be very clear. You should go to your desk and do some more online action and you would check the box. But is this online action then really related to good learning? That is something that we should challenge. I already have used a discussion point before to challenge the idea that data is objective, so I will not repeat this statement here just to save a little bit of time. What is also important to remember is that we should not forget about the low-hanging fruit. Of course, we can listen to researchers, and researchers are really looking into the frontiers of what would have been possible. They are looking into maybe using brain waves to measure learning of students, but this is something that's quite unlikely in the next years to really have impact on real learning at scale. So we can use maybe some existing and valid or trusted assessment data before starting to look into new data to provide feedback. And maybe we can rely on such trusted measures for effective feedback at scale that could still be possibly mediated by an expert, also to stick to the GDPR regulations. I just want to show you one example that we are currently deploying at scale at the University of Leuven, where we're using assessment data, which is already used just by grading students, that we are already used to provide feedback and deliver diplomas, but that we make it available in a graphical representation for student advisors that could use then this data, this objective data, to discuss the study situation of a student. They can dig deeper on data they did not have readily available before, like histograms of particular courses, but they could also look, for instance, at the connection of this particular data of student success in 1 year to the relationship on how many years students in the past needed to finish their diploma. What we should also keep into mind is that if we want to use learning analytics, that you really have to consider learning analytics when you are designing your learning activities. If you want to measure something useful, you have to design what you're doing to make sure that you're measuring something useful. So don't think afterwards, oh, maybe I could use this measure to then provide feedback. No, you have to design your learning activities such that the data you will produce at least has a potential to be useful for learning analytics. Then I want to also address one additional concern, is that we have to be aware of students gaming the system. Again, this example of warning your online activity is lagging behind. A student can easily solve this by just going to the computer and doing some particular clicks. But will the student then actually have been doing valuable learning and real learning? And then if you're going to use such measures, some data for summative assessment, you will threaten the validity of your measures. So before they could have been useful measures for real learning, but as soon as you're basing feedback on that and particular assessment and summative assessment, you're threatening the validity of the data you're using. So maybe we should first trying to focus more on formative assessment and then already assess the impact on the data we are gathering, and if the actual use of the data is not threatening the validity of the data we are capturing. Then another recommendation is that we should never forget about educational theory. Technology is just a means. It could be a very powerful means that offers a lot of possibilities. So let us use technology to challenge the status quo and support evolutions towards powerful assessment for learning. And I just want to elaborate on one particular thing, and that's on fair testing. I think I want to state that we tend to overrate how fair our traditional tests are. For instance, we have a lot of professors that believe that oral examination is the holy grail, and that the only problem with that is that it doesn't scale well to large student groups. But we underestimate the impact, for instance, of some co-founding factors, like that we actually will also grade how fast the student is to get oral clues we give them. There might be implicit biases present, etc. So maybe we can think about how technology can help us there. Just one example I want to give, because I've been doing research on that, is how we could use technology to provide better logistical support to implement less biased scoring methods for multiple choice assessment. So we have been using multiple score tests for a long while, and they can be graded automatically. So this is in fact an example how technology can help us to build tests. We also know that we consider multiple choice a problem that students can guess the correct answer, because we offer them the correct answer in one of these possibilities. So then we have been doing some scoring methods that would punish guessing, like the correction for guessing, but these also introduce biases. So we can, for instance, show that these are disadvantages for risk-averse students, and there are research that state that, for instance, female students are more risk-averse. So this is an example of correction for guessing. If you're correct, you can get 1 point. If it's blank, you get 0 points. And if it's wrong, you get -1/3. But you also have research on alternative scoring methods, even if we just keep the multiple choice test, but just will correct them differently. For instance, you have elimination marking, where for each alternative, students can indicate if they believe it's a valid alternative or not. By then, for excluding 2 options and not all but one, students can show their partial knowledge, and you can still discourage guessing. And it has been showing that this has less impact of the personality trait risk aversion. If we look on reasons why such methods are not implemented, often technology is stated as one of the reasons, because the software we have does not support yet such assessment methods. So we also should think about such low-hanging fruit that would help us to implement more valid procedures for scoring even existing well-used methods of assessment, such as multiple choice. I want to thank you for listening to my 2 small thoughts.
Thank you, Professor De Laat. And now our second debate speaker is Mrs. Bieke de Vries, who is attached to the Educational Quality Assurance Office at Universiteit Ghent.
Hello, does everybody hear me?
Yes.
I didn't know actually that we were allowed to prepare a presentation, so I don't have a presentation. So I'm going to try to entertain you all and to explain some things just with my face and my hands. I listened quite carefully to the presentations that have been presented today, and I would like to give 2 examples of the idea to use tools, especially for continuous assessment, permanent evaluation, and for assessment for learning. As I think it was in the 3rd presentation, it was already stated that tools can be particularly beneficial for those kind of evaluation. So, for example, I think it was in the presentation of Professor Valke, there was the example of self-tests. So students can, through an online platform, they can take a self-test, and through that self-test, they can get rapidly feedback because the self-test is automatically graded. So it's more efficient, both for students, both for teachers. So actually, that way, with those self-tests, students are able to get more feedback because they can do more tests. They can do several tests during the semester, and also for the teachers, it's more easy to provide several tests. But what if we find that students do not take those self-tests? We actually did some small experiments in courses, and we saw that teachers provided self-tests, but that students didn't make them. And we wondered how. Well, that's very curious, because in advance, students told us, oh, we would be very pleased with self-tests. But we saw, hey, very strange, students don't make them. How would that be? Or why would that be? So then actually, we looked at the learning analytics. The learning analytics we already have nowadays. And what did we see? That students didn't find the self-tests. So we could actually see that they did not view the page where the self-tests were. And when we afterwards asked students, well, did you know that there were self-tests? They said no. And they said, and we asked, well, would you think self-tests are useful? Yes, we would. So that is an example of how technology that can be really useful for assessment for learning, for continuous assessment, with the combination of learning analytics, can be actually really useful to raise the quality of evaluating large students group. So that is a first example of how we can use, I think, new technologies to improve that quality. A second example, and it was already a bit mentioned as well in the presentations, is the use of peer feedback. So, for example, when you have tools that facilitate that students can give peer feedback to each other, even within large students groups, that gives the possibility for example, best contribution grading. What do I mean with best contribution grading? It's the principle that in a first step, students make a product, students make an assignment, or students create a video or something like that. Second, other peers give feedback. Okay, good. They get some criteria, some methods to give feedback. Very well. Then they improve their product. And then that process they do 3-4 times. And in the end, they choose which of those products they made. So they made 3 or 4. They choose which product do I think that represents my best self? What was my best product? And that product is given to the teacher to evaluate. So in this way, the student gets a lot of feedback because we work with peer feedback. They get a lot of opportunities to improve themselves because they do it several times with a first product, with a second product, with a third product. And also for the teacher, it's very beneficial because he or she will already get a far more advanced work product than would be the case when there was no peer feedback or no best contribution grading. So I think if we use technology smart, I think they can really help to raise the quantity and quality of evaluation for large student groups. That was my small presentation with PowerPoint.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mrs. De Vries. And so now we come to our third debate speaker, who is Mr. Lucas Van Molle, a student representative who is president of the FEF, the Fédération des étudiants francophones. Mr. Van Molle, it's up to you.
Thank you. Do you hear me? Or
yes, yeah. Yes.
Perfect. So thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to bring a student perspective on the subject. Well, I would like to begin my intervention by starting from the basic postulates of the presentation text of this forum. So yeah, first, the first basic postulate is that assessment will be one of the most important tasks and necessary to motivate students to work. Well, perhaps we are putting a lot of energy into thinking about examination procedures when we could be thinking about why we assess, what we evaluate with assessment, and how to motivate students differently. Because if we assume that assessment motivates students, then we accept that students are in fact motivated by the fear of failure and the financial implication that comes with failure for the most disadvantaged students. Secondly, it seems that there is like a stake in making the most time in evaluating the most efficiently. This has a very economic logic to it. If we assume to choose to do an evaluation, we must accept that, in fact, that it is a long process that takes time, and we must be able to refuse that teaching respond to the logic of profitability. Thirdly, current evaluation methods create unfair evaluations. On this, we agree. Multiple choice tests, for example, as it was said previously, disadvantaged women. Several studies have demonstrated this, which has led some institutions to prohibit the use of negative marks without, unfortunately, prohibiting the use of multiple choice tests. Online exams, for the part, disadvantaged precarious students who know the digital divide and do not always benefit from all the necessary commodity at home. For that, the health crisis and distance learning have highlighted this digital divide that is very present even within our younger generation. But well, we can, however, grant a virtue to the use of new technologies. Indeed, it can make it possible to have teaching that focus more on feedback and peer review, and therefore to have a more regular and more personalized follow-up. We could therefore use technology to reduce certification evaluations and focus on formative evaluations. This last point is for us crucial, since higher education repeats social and cultural inequalities. Continuous assessment seems to be at the center of the necessary democratization of success. By example, continuous assessment does not allow to judge a student on his performance at a given moment, but rather to appreciate the evolution of his abilities through the course of his studies. Well, while preparing this intervention, I asked some friends their feeling about evaluation in the higher education, and one of them explained, well, that at the academy where she does guitar, they suppress the exams with points. So instead of having a guitar exam, she has an audition where there are several to play a piece of their choice. The students and the jury discuss the performance, and at the end of the year, the jury decide if the students satisfy the requirements of the second year and if they can go on to the source. So there is always a notion of success and failure, but on the other hand, she won't have a grade unlike last year when she had 93% and she focused on that, while telling herself that another student had 94% and that she was so not the best. She told me that she found it destabilizing to have that because she had integrated that she has to be told how well literally she had performed, and that if she wasn't giving a note, well, what's the point? And then it made her realize that the point of playing guitar was to play guitar, to have fun playing, to please those who listen to her, and that no one cares about evaluating her performance. So the fact of receiving a grade made her forget the reasons why she was playing guitar. And now she feels like she's rediscovering the pleasure of playing without constantly aiming at the end of the year evaluation, and she finds that healthy and salutary. So my friend's sentiment may seem lighthearted or even futile, but by making the analogy with higher education, we open a reflection on the meaning of studying. Why do we go to school, especially to the university? The current way of thinking will certainly make the majority of students answer that is it to give themselves the best chances to get a job? The current evaluation and rating system also reinforce a constant pressure to perform. It is all about having the best rating. Yet, isn't the very essence of higher education to give students the tools to develop, discover themselves, and find a place as actor in society? Well, in any case, that is what my organization stands for. Higher education must contribute to an objective of individual and collective emancipation. And the condition for this emancipation in a complex and changing world is the development of faculty of critical analysis of knowledge and of the evidence that are relayed in education as in society. It is also important that students be equipped with the tools to become engaged citizens capable of changing and improving society. So does our evaluation system contribute to this dynamic? Certainly not. What I mean is that you cannot evaluate the faculty of critical analysis with a multiple choice test or with a written exams with a short answer. Is it the fault of the teacher? Not anymore. It must be said that the current financing of our education system can no longer guarantee its quality. It is a lack of funding that I want to highlight here, and not the necessary massification and democratization of higher education. Education needs more financial means to fulfill its mission. As I was saying, we must refuse the logic of profitability. This is why we cannot accept the argument of the lack of means of our government, of communities. And we must call for innovative solutions to refinance education while answering its accessibility, which is a major democratic issue. Well, that was my little contribution for this debate.
Thank you, Mr. Van Molen. And now we give the floor to the fourth debate speaker, who is Mr. Antoine Bakash, also a student representative who is a board member of the Flemish Student Association, the Vereniging van Vlaamse Studenten. Please, Mr. Bakash, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you for having me today and for this interesting debate, which I already learned a lot from it, from listening to different points of views from different perspectives. My name is Antoine Bakash. I study at the VUB Political Sciences. I am the board member of VVS for International Affairs, and I've been also living in Belgium for 5 years. I come originally from Syria, so I'm also experiencing this system quite recently, and I'm happy to share some of my personal points and experiences with you today. Since I'm one of the last speakers, a lot of points have been already mentioned, but let me start by saying that VVS and me, we believe that the student should be and remain the center of this discussion when it comes to online learning, when it comes to online exams. technology is nothing more than a way to help students to develop skills and to prepare them for the society better for their own advantage. And of course, it should happen then step by step, but not to put more pressure on students by giving more online tasks, which sometimes feedback will not be given, for example. A small note here, since before has been mentioned that there are some tests online for the students to do, and sometimes the students cannot find them. That's totally true. I'm one of these students that struggled in the beginning to find these tests, but let's also be honest sometimes and say that sometimes the students have no energy left anymore to try to find these tests. Since the last year or even more, because of the current situation, students have been required to stay behind the screen all day long and to keep listening to some lectures, which were of course interesting, and I'm sure that the professors did their best to make it as interesting and interactive as possible, but also there were big challenges for students to stay online and behind the screen. More online learning and the use of technology means more investment, which means that we also need to pay more attention to train professors and assistants to cope up with this technology and with the current challenges. Some of the professors, I've heard from some of my friends in the previous year, that they didn't want to record or record the lectures and use a lot of technology, not because they didn't want to, but because they didn't know how to manage it in the best way possible. Of course, this is due to the lockdown and that everything was new to most of us. We also need to provide students the needed tools to access these online platforms. Students already have a lot of pressure, stress from having an exam, and we should try to avoid them having extra stress by thinking, will I have strong connection to the internet so I can do my exam? Will my laptop work? Will I have enough battery, and so on? Also, we need to give extra attention to the international students, and here refugee students are included, because for them it's already a big challenge to adopt the system of education we have in Belgium or in Flanders, as if I'm speaking. And of course, they would be also expected from them to cope up with the changes, but with extra support. Of course, personally, I do support the use of when it comes to online exams, but let's also not forget that some programs do require the oral exams to test some extra skills of the student, be seen or shown in online exams. It also including the students in every step when it comes to online learning is very important. It was mentioned before, students giving feedback to each other. I've personally experienced this at VB, and it's for sure a very interesting way to motivate us and to be more engaged in the process of online learning. There's also another point when it comes to the data, the ethical use of student data and learning analytics. Students, let's also not forget that students are the owners of their data. This data should never be used against them to prevent them from doing exam or from attending course, or to give them some access to the platform, but only to improve, after all, the quality of education we have. Increasing the assessment, for example, due to data collection learning analytics means increasing pressure on students. This will have impact on their performance and will have impact on their mental health. The conclusion is quite simple. The use of technology should aim to increase the quality of education we have. It should make education more accessible for students of all backgrounds, students with the special needs and learning disabilities should be provided with adjustment materials. We do need to move forward for sure with the society and with the new challenges, but let's make it step by step, and let's make sure that no students would be left behind, or that we will not even make it more difficult for the students who already had it difficult by the system itself.